Welcome back to Danny Rants. Today we have a very special guest. Like always, every week we've got a special guest, but this week we have a guy that goes by the name of Gavin Campbell. So Gavin is a pioneer of the Melbourne club scene from the 80s and 90s till today. He's a producer and a record label owner, and he was also a big part and the promoter of one of the most probably infamous moments in club history, which was the Tasty Raid back in the 90s. So we're going to go through all this stuff, but Gavin, I'm giving you a wrap up. If you want to explain to people sort of, I guess, what you have done in the past, 44 decades, that'd be great. And what you're sort of still doing now.
Gee, have you got, that would take a bit. Okay, so I started DJing the first night I started running my own club night. So that was back in 1983. The club night had been running for a few months previously, the year before, by a friend of mine who was inspired by an idea that I had to do it. So he went out and did it and I worked for him. Then he left and his girlfriend and I, they'd split up. We started this club night and I started DJing on that night. So that was 1983.
What was that club called?
It's called Swelter.
Yep.
And it was pretty early. There was no house music, of course. It was soul, funk, disco, and cool synth pop, the stuff was very British. And then as I started understanding how to search for the right music for clubs, I started discovering all the 80s electronica from New York and, stuff like that. And so I did all that kind of stuff until about, there was another club, Razer, that came along in 86. And that was, we're talking about really underground clubs, like there was no promotion for them. And then house music came along and it kind of started to get, then the club scene started to develop more like it is now.
Yeah.
With like house clubs, club clubs.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So when you're first starting out, right? So I know you're from, correct me if I'm wrong, but from West Melbourne?
No, I'm from the western suburbs.
Western suburbs of Melbourne?
Altona and Williamstown.
Okay. And so when you were growing up there, like what did the club scene look like prior to you sort of getting involved? And what inspired you to get involved in it?
Well, it just looked like mainstream venues, The club that I was first aware of, there was a couple. There was the Chevron and the Underground, particularly the Melbourne Underground on King Street, which was Brian Goldsmith's club. He had a really glamorous type of approach. It was like a how do I put it? Like a do-it-yourself, homely thing, but very glamorous at the same time. And I was kind of attracted to that actually. And then the other clubs were Monday night at the Chevron had a night called Chaps, which was gay. And I gravitated towards that late 1979. But then I used to hang around I'm sort of trying to grapple to sort of put it all in a timeline. I used to hang out in the ballroom scene, Seaview Ballroom in St Kilda, or the little band scene and the birthday party, Hunters and Collectors and all that. And from that scene, we would occasionally go to Chasers and we just started coming up with ideas of running our own little dance club nights. I actually got the idea from watching someone else do it on a Tuesday night. It was, where Riverland is?
Yeah.
There used to be a nightclub there called Meridian, very small. And on Tuesdays we had just a little dance thing, but it was people from the Seaview Ballroom. And that's when I got the idea for Swelter. I'd gone right around in a circle then, haven't I?
No, not at all. So how old were you when you started your first club at Swelter in St Kilda?
23.
Yeah, okay. So prior to that, you were just a punter, enjoying it?
I was just a punter hanging out. I was a student. I was studying, going to teachers' college, studying acting and English literature and stuff, and got waylaid hanging out in the band scene in St Kilda, taking drugs all of a sudden and things like that. And to be honest, I think my mind got a little bit wild at the time, and that's when I started to have ideas about, we could have this club, we could do this, we could do that, because I was hanging out with musicians. One of my main cohorts was Mark Seymour, who formed Hunters and Collectors while we were hanging out and going out and stuff, and then he'd started talking about this band, things like that. So when I eventually started Razer, which was in the mid-'80s,
Which goes down as one of the most iconic kind of nightclubs in Melbourne, right?
Well, yeah, I'm going to call it. It was the proper beginning of underground nightclubs in Melbourne.
Because prior to that, was it bands and stuff? Like, because I guess from where I sit, like it's always been DJing for me. So be it from 12-inch to then, CDJs and whatnot. Even from bands, it was pub bands. But back in when you're talking about there was like, I guess, venues with bands and people would go watch them. When was that transition to people just playing, DJs and whatnot, and people coming there just for a dance?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's I'm trying to write a book, and I'm doing a fair bit of research on it to try to articulate this morphing from bands and that type of scene. But you've got to remember there was nightclubs as well, you would hear Italo disco and a Euro kind of trashy sound in these clubs. It was very mainstream. Sometimes they would have an alternative dance floor and there'd be some pop music played, but it wasn't the main dance floor. I'm thinking of Underground. They had 2 dance floors at one point. But so there were, those, I don't want to sound too egotistical, but I was one of the people that kind of grabbed that bull by the horns and transitioned from clubs and bands, from mainstream clubs or bands into like a cool club where you heard a lot of James Brown being played and stuff like that. So my Swelter and Razer were very, very different to all the other nightclubs in terms of soundtrack and clientele. We had some fairly cool underground fashion types, advertising types, lots of film industry people would come. And then, of course, the grungy, and I'm talking really grungy, like lots of heroin and stuff, scene from St Kilda coming into Razer. We started Razer in 86. Am I jumping around too much?
Not at all, no. So Swelter was in St Kilda and that was 83.
Swelter was in town.
In town, okay.
In town, inspired by the place that used to be at Riverland. And that was in Queen Street in like a basement. Beneath, you probably are aware of, what is it, the RACV club? Down in the basement at Matilda's, which was the pub beneath that. It was called the Cortez Bar, and we just had that for 2 years. And that was Tuesday nights. And then I shut that and then started up Razer with the woman. Her name was Jules Taylor. She was running the Hardware Club, which was really cool, really, really, really underground and quite a fascinating social scene. So, and that was also an inspiration for Razer.
So what kind of numbers were you doing at Razer? I know you had like a 6-year tender where you were sort of, dominating that part of Melbourne and that underground club scene, and, you probably helped transition and introduce house music and techno to Melbourne. But what kind of numbers were you doing at Razer when you first sort of started?
Well, we only did it one night a week. It was Friday nights. And, it could have just been 200 or 300 people for a year or so. Opening night, there was well over 1,000 people. Like, I had a reputation already, and so did Jules, because the Hardware Club was really quite something. It's not even actually documented properly that particular time. So there was a riot on the opening night, then it would quieten down. Melbourne had this thing where people would come to an opening and then they'd just piss off again for quite a few months until you found your feet, if you found your feet.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. No, you know what?
All my club nights were the same. We'd do 2,000 opening night, and then it would just be an uphill battle for months. And then it was either you won or you lost at that 3 to 6 month mark. And then you became iconic. Like that was sort of, Melbourne's been the same for, I think, the last...
It's true. So I guess I'm not saying anything new, am I?
Yeah.
I'm just, so it was like that back then. But you see, word of mouth was super strong.
That's my next question. I wanted to ask that. Now we've got digital marketing, or prior to that, we used to do a lot of street marketing or posters and whatnot. How did you used to market those clubs back then?
Word of mouth. See, this is the thing about Melbourne. It's a very cool city. It always has been. And the social networks are indelible. And we would do mailing lists. Like, for example, the Hardware Club was in a building that was literally for members, for people in the hardware industry, retail. So the Hardware Club had a club license You had to sign in. You had to be a member or a guest. That's what Razer was too. Razer was the light car club of Australia. So you had to be a member or a guest to get in. So I brought that up to illustrate that we had mailing lists. And we were pretty organised. My business partner ended up being the woman who did the first club with me came back to take over from Jules at Razer because Jules wanted to leave. So she was very organised. She was like a lawyer. And so we would have mail out lines.
When you say mail out list, you're actually putting like invitations in
an envelope
and sending it out to people.
And addressing it, yeah. And we had about 300 names was the first one, and I thought that was massive. But we ended up with 1,000 or two by the time Razer was running properly because it was all memberships. And that's what my kind of model for clubs for years was to find venues that were not nightclubs, but they had late liquor license. And then I would create something like a pop-up type of do-it-yourself vibe. But because we had smarts in terms of good sound, good lights, like the right colours and all that, like they were really cool little underground vibe.
Were you building that? Was it already in there when you went to the light car club, or was it you had to assemble it yourself?
We assembled it ourselves. In the dining room, the Light Car Club was in a big old Art Deco mansion, and it was purpose-built by the Light Car Club of Australia because the Grand Prix track, there used to be races down Queen's Road. So I don't think it was the Grand Prix though. But so there were races, and so the Light Car Club had a balcony that stretched all the way along Queen's Road, and you could look out and watch the cars racing, and there was a barbecue up there. So we had all these different types of things going on in the one building. And in the dance room, it was the dining room. So we cut a huge piece of carpet out, and each Friday night we would roll it up, and that was our dance floor. And we built a DJ booth. I got some artist friends it was very arty and underground and grungy. And we got lots of steel plates and shot bullet holes in it so that when you put the strobe inside at the DJ's feet, there would be all these kind of crazy sparks coming out of it. And horns, anyway, it was pretty wild. And so we built that, yeah. And then we also, upstairs there were other rooms that weren't really used very much. So we turned one of them into a cocktail bar. And so it was half done ourselves, but it was just an old building to play in, really.
So it actually wasn't a nightclub. It was like a club for like a community of someone. You guys turned it into a nightclub.
Yeah. Well, the Light Car Club of Australia was for car enthusiasts.
It's so hard because now there'd be no way they would allow you to do that. You have to,
it's
so regulated and there's so many licenses. You kind of lose that creativity. And I think it's probably why we're struggling right now in Melbourne clubs because the creativity that people like us had when we first started is now getting tighter and tighter and stricter.
There's not really much of it anymore, is there?
And the other thing too is people that work in this space, they're traditionally creatives. Doesn't matter if you talk from the 80s to the 2000s to now. Whereas if you're in a space where you struggle to be creative, it sort of takes away the allure for these people to come in and sort of reinvent for their own generations, right?
Yep. Yes, true.
So with Razer, as I said before, we sort of touched on it. It was one of the more iconic nightclubs that's been in Melbourne's history. There was a lot of famous people went to that venue and attended. Can you tell me about some of those people that kind of used to, I guess, be regulars?
Well, as I say, Razer was born from the band scene in St Kilda, really. And anybody you can name that was performing live in Melbourne in a band, whether they be a punk band or Mondo Rock or Hunters and Collectors or In Excess, you name it. All of the bands knew that little social scene and would come in. So it was riddled with musicians and celebrities, local celebrities and all that kind of stuff. And eventually after a while, because it ran for just under 6 years, we ended up on the books of all of the companies that would bring celebrities to Australia, even Village Roadshow, Virgin Music, you name it. They would have a little what to do guide for celebrities and their minders. And Razer was always listed as this is a must do in Melbourne. You must see, because I think Melbourne was quite proud of Razer. It was like really hip. And so it just got crazy in terms of celebrities, and then all the models would start coming from the metro, you know, and like the model types that would go to the metro, then they started. So Razer had this grunge and glam going on for the last couple of years.
So the grunge and glam you're talking about, you said the heroin scene was coming through, then you had all the rock and music people, you had celebrities and models coming from the metro. I know people like Nirvana attended and Kylie
Nirvana
Minogue
were
attended.
there, yeah.
Yeah, so so then why did Razer actually shut down?
Well, at the time, so I know I've just remembered, I didn't actually tell you, after a while we ended up with 1,000 to 1,500 people in the house every Friday night, and that would have 3 different turnovers.
Oh, wow.
Like there'd be a very early crowd, a middle crowd, and then a late crowd of people that would come from other clubs. I knew that I didn't answer that question properly. So there were times when it was just packed all the time. And then there was really quiet periods as well, like the beginning of winter. It doesn't matter what's going on. People hide, you know, in Melbourne. So I'm sorry, I've digressed to answer. It's
funny because you've got me on a thing now, because we used to call that the cold snap. So like still the same thing. There was 6 to 7 weeks when it first gets cold in Melbourne, everyone disappears.
They just disappear.
And then they get used to the cold and they come back out in like more strength. The numbers of like post-July to September, October were our best months. So it's interesting to hear the similarities like decades apart.
Well, yeah, exactly. I would get quite frustrated with people. Like sometimes I would think, yeah, Melbourne's cool, but it's just too pretentious, you know. They just hold back, you know, for the sake of it. But, you know, I probably wouldn't go out to a club if I didn't think it was happening.
Or you weren't getting paid. So why did Razer come to an end?
Why it came to an end, this is an interesting story. So the Light Car Club and I started arguing a fair bit while we were trying to run the club on a Friday night, because the alcohol would keep running out. Things like that would be going on. So the cash flow within the Light Car Club itself started faltering. And I didn't know, they didn't confide in me at all, or Andrea, my business partner, who you would think they would. What happened was the Light Car Club decided one year to take on Bathurst and be the producer of the Bathurst races. And it failed. I don't know why they took it on. I think maybe it didn't run for a year or two. So they did Bathurst, lost a shitload of money, and basically went broke and weren't able to pay their rent. They were too proud, because it was like a bunch of kind of older men, you know, running. They were the board of the Light Car Club of Australia. And so the state government had the lease, had the building. They'd given the Light Car Club the lease for years and years. They just evicted them. So with them getting evicted, we had to shut as well. I think that closing in our prime, being forced to shut, helped Razer become iconic.
I get you, that makes sense.
Legendary. Just like the Raid did with Tasty.
Yeah.
I know that both of these events have their own characteristics and importance and this and that, but the club itself, the fun club that had been running week after week after week, in both instances, was like, fuck no, we're losing Tasty, or we've lost Razer, you know.
It's interesting you say that, because like Honky Tonks was much the same. They were still like, 6 years in, they were dominating, and people still refer to that club as one of the best clubs in the 2000s.
Yes.
But it also shut down because the lease ran out. Well, they thought it was going to run out, but it didn't in the end. But it was cut down its prime. So you're right. Like that's another really interesting point.
It can be, you know what? If you've got money and balls, it can be a great marketing tool.
Yeah.
Shut the thing, and then I know I've never even thought like that. I don't, when I just said that. But yeah, it can really give you a shot. My reputation has been solid for a long time as a promoter because of Tasty.
Yeah, because you never really had a fail, right?
Razer.
Like,
pardon?
You never really had a fail. You sort of
Not really. Well, we did. We put together 12 clubs over the years. There was 3. There was Swelter, Razer, and then Temple straight after Razer. And then after that, we took off in the 90s and we had 2 or 3 club nights running all at the same time. So all in all, I was involved in a dozen clubs. 7 of them were bona fide classic clubs, influential, all underground. We never ever did a club, Oh, we did actually. We went to Redheads and did Bump, which was mainstream.
Yep.
Yeah.
1 out of 7 is not bad.
Pardon?
1 out of 12 is not bad.
Right, true.
So during that period, you talk about Razer, you talk about Temple, you talk about Tasty, whatever, like kind of focusing on the Razer part, was there like a iconic moment or memory or night that you have of that venue?
There's one night in particular that was just so over the top. I don't know if this is going to sound pathetic, but it was a moment where, as the person who was in charge of the club, it was mine, I just threw my hands up and hid because it was out of control. It was absolutely out of control, and I thought, fuck, I'm just going to sit here quietly and take a breather. And I was sitting at the feet of the DJ in the DJ booth. No one could see me, even if they came up to say hello. And that was the night of the 3rd birthday when we had a special band. We put together a special band, and U2 were there that night. And that was the first time U2 had shown up to the club. They were the biggest band in the world, and Australia was really excited to have them touring and stuff. And the people that were doing security for U2 were actually my security, who had left my club to branch out, and do other work, other more, stimulating work, like looking after major celebrities and stuff. And they started telling me that, we couldn't have people around Bono and all. And I said, oh, fuck off. I'm not even going to say his name. But, and so I just realized that it was just like this beast, and it was so busy, and there were people coming over the roof to get in because the queue was so long. And I just thought, this is crazy. And it wasn't a panic attack, but I remember sitting there thinking, what have I created? What is this? I didn't know what to do.
Almost helpless.
Helpless.
Yeah.
I know that took a long, I've never talked about that particular incident, but most people I know will go, oh, but yeah, it's something that happened, and I've never actually talked about it before.
Again, going back, we're having this kind of tit for tat thing, but it's like, I've had that same feeling before where it's too busy and I'm helpless and I feel like I can't control what's happening. But then on the other spectrum of it, I've had it where it's dead and I'm helpless. No matter what I do, I can't get people in. So It's like one extreme to the other, but I definitely relate to that feeling.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And it's funny that it stood out just there. As I say, I've been doing a lot of homework and research, and I take notes and stuff. I've been doing it for 3 years in preparation to just knuckle down and write a book. And maybe that was something that I was making notes till very late last night. So I don't know why that all popped into my head then. But it's interesting.
Very
There's
interesting.
so much going on in my head.
I like you casually just pop out. Oh yeah, you two came to the club.
Yeah. Well, they came 3 weeks in a row.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they flew back. They would come back to Melbourne on Fridays to go to Razer. They loved it. But you see, the people that brought them to Razer were Richard Lowenstein, who was making a documentary about them on tour at the time. And they were working on music with some of my friends. It's all. Have you heard of Echo Homo? Troy
Yes.
Davies?
Yep.
He was working behind the bar at Razer for most of the 6 years, and pissing off to work with Richard on films and stuff like that. So they brought U2 in, and U2 felt right at home. So I know it sounds very exciting and cool, but that's why, because we all had personal connections, which made them feel we want to be here.
So why do you think that Razer was such a spot for them to come visit? You talk some of these massive names like Nirvana, U2, you talk about In Excess. Like why was Kylie Minogue? Like why was this the spot for them to come visit?
Because it was unique in the sense that the music was fantastic. Like all you had to do was walk in there. You could hear like when you walk into Berghain, you go, wow, the sound is so incredible. It's instantly like you got your approval. So Razer was very much like that with the lighting and the sound and the music itself. And you couldn't really go, you could bypass the dance floor and go upstairs to the pool room and stuff like that. But you could always hear, because I had speakers in the foyers and in the back bars, so that the dance floor always had movement because people would hear it and go running in to dance and stuff. So I think it was just, I'll say it, the right music and the right people were in the house, and famous people. I mean, it's quite a luxury for them to walk in somewhere and no one gives a fuck.
Because that's the next part I was going to say is like, you know, these days, you don't see celebrities in nightclubs. Like even when I first started out, occasionally you would. Now they're never there. And if they are, they're hidden in the back room that no one can see them, or they're being paid copious amounts of money to be there.
Yeah.
So I feel like the new generation is never going to see these interactions of like, you know, YouTube rocking up or.
This is true. I haven't seen, the only time I see famous people in clubs, like I work at the SB a lot, and you see some famous footballers coming in, but not celebrities. Although, what's her name? Was it Gaga? Someone last year, I can't remember who it was now. It wasn't Gaga. Actually came into the SB and the whole place was that. And I thought, fuck, this is not cool.
Yeah, and I think it's the camera phones and stuff too, right? Like,
pardon?
For them, it's like they're going to be filmed. Like it's their invasion of privacy at every single minute.
Yeah.
Whereas back then they could go there, maybe there was a bit of a swelter for a little second, then everyone died down and they became a patron. Whereas now it's like everyone just films them for 45 minutes. It's like,
anyone can be famous.
Yeah.
Fame is cheap.
Exactly, yeah. So then into the 90s, we go to Tasty. So Tasty, obviously something that we really want to touch on, which is a gay club. And previous to that, you had not ran gay clubs. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm a gay man, but I wasn't that comfortable with being gay, even though I hung out. I think I was, but maybe just on a personal level. So, but this was a good thing because all my cool gay friends were staffing my clubs always, especially women, lesbians, and this dragged in the cool gay scene. And as you were saying, like earlier, the clubs were mixed, genuinely mixed with gays and straights. But back in the day when it was an anomaly for mixed crowds to be in the same thing, it was kind of exclusive to the underground clubs.
So previous to that, like obviously you talk about Tasty being a gay club, right? And like Razer, which is sort of like a mix of gay and straight, and you know, a lot of these early house and techno clubs became like a mix of gay and straight. But where was there gay clubs previous to the 90s?
Oh yeah. A lot of them were they were fairly bland. There were, and those that weren't. I've always. I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but I've always felt that gay clubs sounded really bad. These days, it's very different. Like you get a lot of techno in gay clubs.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a good thing. But back in the day, it would be fluffy. I'm not a big fan of Italo disco, I must say. I know there's some good stuff and I've got music that I play that is heavily influenced by it. But on the whole, I found it too fluffy. Like, do you remember Lime?
No.
That band Lime and Fun?
No, neither.
Oh my God. They were just really girly, bouncy Italo disco type stuff. And I was never into that scene at all. That's what they sounded like.
Yeah.
And you would, they would be fairly sleazy too. There was always a gay scene because there's always been gay people, you know. Going back into the 20s, 30s, 40s, there was always healthy gay scenes in most cool cities, you know, like especially in Europe. But Melbourne, it's funny. With my research, I found out that there was always cool rooms in Melbourne, like since say the 60s, that were meeting places for gay people. It wasn't characterized by having cool music and an underground thing and all that kind of stuff, but they always existed because they have to really. It was that and beats, you know, to meet people. And when Tasty came along in 1990, it was 92, we did it at Temple first. And then we moved it to the Commerce Club because we got locked out of Temple by the landlord who wanted to turn it into apartments, which is still going on today.
Yeah,
really.
same common theme. All my favourite nightclubs mostly have been knocked down and turned into apartments.
You could live in them now.
Yeah.
So when Tasty came along, it was very, very much an alternative gay style. There was nothing like it. We were playing upfront club music and still bringing in the best of Sylvester and some great old disco. you know, and stuff like that just didn't really happen in Melbourne's gay clubs. So I hope I've done justice to that answer. I don't think I have.
No, you have. You definitely have. Yeah. So then you talk about your Tasty, you bring it in. And then from there, you're sort of introducing, like the scene shifted from 80s where it's like, you know, James Brown and artists like that, sort of pop, funk and soul.
Yep.
And then you're sort of introducing house and disco at Razer.
Razer, yes.
Then you go into Tasty, and Tasty it's a dance club.
Tasty is just full on dance.
Yeah.
Although there was also, there was what we call the grope maze, which was just sex on premises area. And that was in the basement at Tasty. That was the first time a licensed venue, like a dance club type thing, had the sex on premises. And because you wouldn't be able to do it in a licensed venue. But we had loopholes galore because of the members and guests thing. Like you could walk in and out with open drinks. You know, your patrons in a normal licensed venue can't leave with a drink.
No.
But we could do all sorts of stuff like that.
Because you weren't a nightclub, you were a club.
We're a club.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
with members and their guests.
And so so it wasn't necessarily you had a sex on premises license, it was that you were allowed to do that on the premises because of the type of license.
Yeah, we could do what we wanted.
And so prior to that,
Pretty much.
So prior to that, it hadn't existed in gay clubs.
Not in clubs, no.
So, previous to Tasty, where you had their grope maze downstairs, which was sex on premise, before that, was there places in Melbourne that actually had sex on premise or
No.
straight or gay?
Not that I'm aware of.
Because
Not in a club where you're going to dance and drink and take drugs. Although you would think that sex on premises because people are always taking drugs in clubs, aren't they? And you sort of drugs and sex go together. Not well, mind you, but they do. No, I don't think so. The reason why we were raided was originally there was a 24-month campaign by Victoria Police to try to, quell the insane drug culture in Melbourne. And of course they would pick on nightclubs, but you would find them in your local social football club and all sorts of stuff. You know, drugs are everywhere really. But the police started going into all the clubs, and then at the very tail end of that, they created a special operation called Operation Maze, which was based on the maze that was downstairs at Tasty. That's what they called that raid, Operation Maze.
So what were the drugs that people were doing back then?
Lots of ecstasy. Not so, amphetamine, yes, but not. I think ecstasy was the main thing. Oh, and a lot of acid. Little tabs were big in clubs. I'm talking about from about 87 to 94, 95. Because the raid occurred in 94 and there'd been a full-on, like at Savage, our other club, which was a mixed kind of rave night in the city. The police would come in like every hour. A dozen of them would walk through the building. Then they'd go to another club on King Street. Then they'd come back and do it again. So they were just trying to quell the madness.
And do you think there was sort of in the 80s, you talk about the rock scene and the bands and stuff, obviously a lot of marijuana, heroin, whatever. But then you get into this house techno scene, which has always been a lot of drugs, like, for the last 4 or 5 decades, whatever. Do you think it was also them trying to adjust to that? Like obviously prior to that, you might have had gay clubs where it was sort of in the underground. Then all of a sudden there's this shift to these drugs, everyone's sort of hanging out together, there's gay clubs, there's sex on premise. Do you think that sort of had like a big part to why
for sure.
Tasty got raided?
Yeah. Do you know what? There was a conflation of all those things and...
Shift of generation almost.
Yeah. But the police really did not have a handle. We used to consider the police to be quite dumb. We would always know that our scene and its activities, nefarious activities, were actually a year or so ahead of what the cops were aware of what was going on. Maybe not a year, maybe less, I don't know. But I think that the Operation Nightclub, I think the whole thing was called, was them trying to get a handle on it, like, yeah, as you've suggested. But Tasty to them was quite full on and bizarre.
Confronting.
very confronting. We had porn playing downstairs, and there would be women in there, like sitting in the corner socializing, and you walk around into the darker part of the maze, and you'd find a bunch of men with no clothes on, all, you know, getting it on and stuff. And so all this was really weird to the...
For sure, would have been. Especially like ones in like their 30s, 40s, yeah, like would have been very hard for them to understand.
Yeah, but the thing is that grope maze was one of the things that defined Tasty, but that was like this bit of seediness down below. I think I went in there once, and a lot of people I know wouldn't bother with it because the dance floor was heaving upstairs, and it was always so much fun. And the attitude at Tasty was extreme hedonism.
So the day of the Tasty raid, can you take us back there? So what happened that day, how it started, and I guess how it turned into this monumental moment in club history?
Well, on that Saturday, as with the previous few Saturdays, we were getting phone calls from people that were saying, I'm a cop. And except for this particular Saturday, it was like 10 times more. We had, you know, about 10 to 20 phone calls, serious phone calls from people claiming to be police. And they said that you're going to be raided tonight. It's on tonight. And we knew one was coming. And so we rang a lot of people. A lot of the regulars didn't bother to show up that night. But those that did, we had about 500 people in that night, up until the time the raid occurred, which was at 2 a.m. Just before 2 a.m. they came in. We told every person in the queue, because there was always a long queue because people would have to sign in as a member and stuff. So the door was slow. And we just told everybody what was going on, and people were like, oh, yeah. And so they would either take their drugs or go home and go somewhere else. We were never involved in selling drugs or providing drugs or doing anything like that, by the way, at any of our clubs. So when we were explaining to everyone that night, that was probably one of the first incidents of patrons talking to us about drugs, if that makes sense. So
Totally.
It was quite a serious warning at the door. Then at just before 2 a.m., 52 cops walked in, and they were all men, and they yelled a lot at the crowd. They turned the lights on. I think they might have been talking to Jared, our manager, in the very beginning of coming in, so they knew how to turn the lights on and stuff. But some people thought it was like a show was going on. It was a lot of confusion. And then our lighting guy, he pushed the smoke button and filled the room with smoke, completely filled it with smoke. The cops did not like that at all. So they strip searched the DJ in front of the whole club once the smoke had cleared. And even started going through his records and basically then they tried to create three groups of people, male, female, and anything else that they didn't understand. And it went on for about 6 hours, slowly but surely, strip searching every single person. But they didn't just take your clothes off and turn around. They actually digitally penetrated most people and shone torches up their bums, and you know, girls had to get their tits out of their bras, all this kind of stuff, you know, and show them what was in the cup. So it was quite visceral, really. Is visceral the right word? Just violent.
Extreme.
Abuse. And they were yelling a lot. They got very frustrated because they couldn't find any drugs in this strange environment that they were sure there were drugs in. They couldn't find them, so they got more and more frustrated. And I think that's, yeah.
What made it escalate?
Pardon?
What made it escalate?
Yeah.
Because 6 hours, that's a long time.
Yeah.
From 2 a.m. to what, 8 a.m. in the morning, people sitting there kind of going to this rigorous raid. Previous to that, had cops done this form of raid before? So even me, like, I guess it's probably because of Tasty, which I want to go into after. That doesn't happen. Yeah, like cops don't come in and raid clubs or even bring dogs in. It's not a thing.
No, well, there was precedent. There was one back in, what would it be, 1988, 89? So this is not part of this general trend of police visiting clubs. We're going back 5-6 years. There was a club on Commercial Road. It's now the Emerson.
Was the market beforehand?
Yeah. At the time, it was Checkpoint Charlie. And Checkpoint Charlie was quite a pretentious club. And there was lots of drugs in that club too. And the police went in one night with cameras. Like Channel 9 was walking in behind them. So I think they were just doing something to show that they were, I don't know why, but they were showing off for the cameras. They went into Checkpoint Charlie. They turned the lights on. They strip searched 6 people, but each person was taken separately into the bathroom. And then in half an hour, everything was back to normal. And that's what I thought was going to happen at Tasty. When we were getting all the warnings, I thought, oh yeah, I know what's going to happen tonight. But it went south. And I just think it was because the cops didn't really, they had like a small idea, a small-minded idea of what Tasty was. They didn't understand the complexity of who was in the room, because then, of course, which I think is the most exciting part of this, the gay community got together. There was a meeting on the Monday morning. After so many phone calls, people were in shock. The whole gay community was completely freaked out about this incident. And lots of movers and shakers met at Joy FM on the Monday morning. And that meeting was to strategize on how, as a community, we fight this. And it was done brilliantly. You know, there was class action. We set up a desk in, what was it called? Well, at the Also Foundation, which used to do all the docs parties and all that kind of stuff in Cato Street, Paran. We put a desk in there and someone would sit there 2 or 3 afternoons a week, and people could go in who were at the raid and get some advice on how to join the class action and all this kind of stuff. So there was, as I say, great strategizing done, and the community fought back and won in court, and it's now become like, what is it, the birth of gay activism, gay rights movement in Victoria, like our Stonewall moment. Sydney has Mardi Gras, and that's turned into something quite big over the years. And it looks like the Tasty Raid anniversary might start to follow suit.
Yeah.
Because we had an amazing party this
August,
year.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think these police, right, like going back into it, and I think I probably know the answer here, but other than the fact that they thought there was copious amounts of drugs being consumed, which no doubt they were at every nightclub in that strip at the point.
Everybody, everywhere did that.
Why do you think they targeted Tasty so aggressively?
I don't really know, to be honest. I don't think they planned to be that aggressive. I think they thought they were just going to bust a club, you know, and probably ruin the club. I don't think they liked it existing. And let's not forget that 2 months prior to this, the Crown Casino opened, and anything in that whole area that was busy was a threat to this new casino having people go there. So it might be paranoia, but I also believe that, you know, they were looking around. I think Tasty might have first come on their radar as a let's see what's going on in town because we've got this big casino to look after.
Getcha.
I don't know. It might be paranoid, but that was always my suspicion. And there are other little incidents to do with people bringing police to Tasty as a favour to police to show them what was going on. I don't really want to say much about that because I'll get myself in trouble, but I know that there were certain people that were up on drugs charges.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Their own personal drugs charges that gave up other things.
There's an interesting thing when you talked about, and I know you kind of like precursed as you talked, but like for me, it sounds strange, but I feel like I need to say it too, just because we're on camera. But you talked about how you warned the punters there was going to be police with drugs. And I want to say and admit to myself that I worked in the industry for 2 decades and we would often do the same. So I just wanted to say that so you didn't stand alone. The reason
I
being,
appreciate that, Danny. Thank you.
I just think is like when I worked in my industry, I refer to it as the gray zone, right? Like we work in a place where the police are sometimes against us, but sometimes the bad guys are against us.
Yes.
And we are just people who sit in the middle, who are trying to create this like amazing, safe atmosphere for people to enjoy their life, maybe outside the 9 to 5, right? So, or the escape to the 9 to 5. So there was times, and a lot of my clubs also were kind of, I guess, like looked at by police as like drug havens in a sense.
Yeah.
Were they not? I think it was an attribution or it was a connection to the music scene at the time. But there was times when we knew things were going to happen and we would warn people that this may happen. So I just, had to bring that up because I didn't want you kind of, stood up on your own 2 feet and admitted that. And I was like, hey, I need to do the same.
This is really reassuring, and I'm really happy that you said that just then because, I have, maybe every few years my idea, like that answer would change.
Yeah.
I'm a little worried that I'm being paranoid about Crown Casino and stuff because as I said, I've started researching. I'm looking at all these things that are going on. But at the time I was thinking the same thing, but then we were distracted by the veracity of the raid. I actually think that they didn't plan to be that full on until they were in the swim, so to speak.
So when it all came out in the wash, I think there was, from my investigation, it was a $6 million payout to all the people that were involved. And then the police kind of denied that they stepped over the line, from my understanding. Is that correct?
They were, they were like, it was like trying to keep a fish on a hook, keep them honest, so to speak. Yeah. But they, as those old school cops left and new ones came in, the whole thing's changed now. And they don't make up excuses about the tasty raid. They own it fully.
Yeah, I saw that. Was it a couple, maybe 10 years ago or something, they stood up and said sorry, right, to the gay community?
We decided, after years of not doing tasty, we decided to have the 20th anniversary with Martha at Chase's.
Queen of Clubs, I call it.
Queen of Clubs.
Yeah.
Martha was fabulous. Martha's a pivotal person in my career. And Martha and Pat, because I met them in the beginning of the 90s. But it was a no-brainer for me to do the 20th anniversary with her at Chase's because I was there with Puffdoof. So Puffdoof moved to Chase's and along comes the 20th anniversary and I thought, I haven't promoted for years, but I know this particular club and the scene so well, I'll just bring all my old friends in for a tasty party. And it worked. It was a real treat. It was great. And we get a lot of press. It's an important thing, what happened, and to remember. So the media talk about Tasty, the raid, when we do an anniversary. And that's when the police, I don't know what was going on in their heads, but they were planning in the build-up to that anniversary to go on TV and apologise. And they did. So I was just giving you a little background as to how that kind of came about. And then this time, in August for the 30th anniversary, which is the first time we've partied since the 20th, I actually sat down with senior police the day before the party, and they were great. We got on really well. They said, we're not coming anywhere near Tasty. Have fun. Tell everyone to have fun. But unless, of course, someone gets bashed or something, and then we'll come. But they didn't say what gets bashed. They just said, unless there's an incident.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
So going through the last sort of, 90s into the gay scene and then all the way up to now, with Puffdoof is still an institution for a lot of younger gay people now. It's very upfront house and techno, and it's been a hero for probably a decade now, I'd say.
Yeah.
But seeing the change of those 3 decades, being not necessarily an openly gay man, but like working in the gay nightclub scene, what are the differences like that you can see from being the 90s? I guess it's one being police or even just like punters and stuff to now. Like what are the sort of major differences you've seen in the last 3 decades?
I don't know. It's a really hard question. I'm a bit of a rebel and quite a maverick in the way I think and do things. So my perspective is not the same as another type of gay man. I don't think. I've always gravitated towards environments where we can be ourselves, and it's cool and I don't want to say subversive, but I do. But, just that underground vibe. And
like
it's
edgy, yeah?
Edgy.
Yeah.
It's always been the same for me. What I do notice is with, the marriage equality debate and referendum and all that kind of stuff. I think that the gays have, it's become more mainstream. There's not much difference anymore. The only time you see something that is obviously queer is some of the underground parties that go on around town, and then they're full on. Like, I DJ'd at Barber last weekend. You know,
No, I haven't,
Barber? Oh, it's full on. So it was kids, gay kids, all dressed up for Halloween, but hard thumping techno.
Oh, that's what's in at the moment, right? That 142 BPM.
Yeah,
they love it.
No fluffy music whatsoever.
Yeah.
Except maybe in the shows. But even the Gaga song, that's quite dark, that new one. So they did a show to that. But, you know, I see some really full-on underground stuff or gays just hanging out anywhere they like, you know. I know that's not a very good answer.
Well, because I know, like, even got like you talk when I was younger, there was Commercial Road, and Commercial Road was sort of like a gay precinct.
Yeah.
And then now there's not really any gay precincts, right?
No.
And I think about that myself. Like, we would often go to, you know, Market or DTs, I think it was called back then, and all the different gay clubs along there, Love Machine on Sundays. And then now they don't exist. Like, when I'm explaining to young people, like, there used to be like gay club precincts, there's not anymore. I often think, like, why? Like, why is there not? Like,
I just think that the gay scene has moved into the mainstream.
Yeah.
Much more accepted.
It makes sense, though. You're right. Like,
yeah. I can talk about, do you know what? The other night at the SB, on Sunday night, I'm DJing at the SB, and when I walked in, I said to Liv, the DJ who just was leaving, I said, have they been hassling you? Like, because it just looked like all just men standing around, like bogan men. And he said, no, they're all right, they're all right. Anyway, about an hour and a half afterwards, they're all dancing and carrying on, and it was quite a busy Sunday night. And this dude comes up to me and asks me to play Chapel Roan's Pink Pony Club, which is a coming out pop song, you know? And I'm thinking, you cannot mistake the lyrics in that song. It's all about queens and coming out, and it's fabulous. And I didn't have it because I didn't think anyone at the SB would be interested in it. And here's these rough men asking me to play it. So the point that I'm making is it's just all the same thing now. It's all mainstream, and then no one gives a fuck about who's a pink pony or not. Do you know what I mean?
Totally, yeah, I understand. 100%. And I guess I get from where you're sitting is like, you know, when you were talking about the 90s, it was underground, it felt edgy, it felt like some, sort of like, you know, away from the public eye and all this sort of stuff, whereas now it doesn't matter what nightclub it is. Like, if it's the most mainstream nightclub, it's all together.
Yeah, it's all together.
Though it's great from a community perspective, from a club / art / music direction, you find it a little bit like harder to differentiate.
Yeah, what I do. To me, it's all the same thing, because you've got to remember, like in the lead up to the August anniversary of the Tasty Raid, just gone, I was interviewed by dozens of radio stations, mainstream community, and magazines and newspapers. All sorts of media are interested in talking about the Tasty Raid for various different reasons too. Yeah, so
I think it lives in folklore forever now, especially, you know, as we're talking about this now, but it's going to continue to be a part of conversation. You talk about Melbourne clubs, people will talk about Tasty Raid.
Yeah.
And I think now it's because it's so polarizing. Like, the concept of that happening now, it seems horrific. But second to that, it's so polarizing. Like, the idea that would happen to be a gay or straight club, doesn't matter. It's almost unfathomable, if that makes sense.
I know, because it was proper abuse that night.
Yeah,
there
correct.
was no question about it. Yeah.
It's because it's an interesting one. So I have a theory which is sort of strange. So obviously we talked about the Melbourne club and drugs have always been synonymous, right? So because of the Tasty Raid, obviously clubs in Melbourne have always gotten, like, there's always been drugs riddled through nightclubs. We've got 24-hour licenses. I think it's a good argument to say that Melbourne is like the Berlin of the South Pacific.
I think so.
And I sometimes think, and I could be completely wrong, this is completely a theory, so no one hold me to this idea, but because of the backlash of the Tasty Raid with the police and how badly they handled it, and then how, I guess, badly they got spanked for what they did, and so they should have, but they then became less they became less aggressive to nightclubs. So it became easier and easier for that club culture to develop because
I agree.
They would never go near. Like, the idea of that happening, like, you know, I worked in nightclubs where people were doing all the wrong things and the police were well aware of it, but they didn't come near it. And I think that you can almost credit what actually happened, that horrific incident at the Tasty Club, to the culture of Melbourne and how it's blown up and becomes this like dance music epicenter because we've been able to have like a little bit of free range from the Tasty Raid, really.
There's not as many eyes on us, and I'm actually glad that you've put it in context like that, because I agree. But not long before he passed away, George Sagoulis actually said to me, Gab, he just said, and it was weird, he took me aside, he wanted to thank me. He said, Tasty took one for the industry.
Actually, I agree.
And we've been able to run our clubs without fear of police walking into bathrooms or this or that and busting people and overstepping.
Because I never once saw it. So in my 2 decades, I saw obviously undercovers come through, but never ever police uniformed coming in harassing punters. Like, it wasn't a
exactly.
thing. And I know in Sydney it happens. I know in Gold Coast and Queensland it happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I think that the Tasty Raid, like as you said, took one for the team, but it's like without that happening, that horrific event, does our culture turn into the megalith that it is now because of how badly the police had to play it safe after that because of the backlash that could come from it.
You're right. And Revs was able to rise out of the ashes of all of that. When I was doing my last club as a promoter, which was called Uranus, and it was the late 90s, and it was a club that opened at this is after Tasty, so it opened at about 4 or 5 in the morning on a Sunday morning, and would go through all Sunday. So it was a precursor to the Revs type of recovery thing. But our end up was Revs on a Sunday afternoon. We would just go and sit there and flake it in because nothing was really going on in there. Only during the night. They hadn't done the Friday afternoon to Monday morning staying open thing. That was yet to happen. I know that all those other underground clubs like Revs and they've benefited from it because the police, it's just allowed to run.
So you don't think Uranus would have been able to be a place or even existed in the ecosystem of nightclubs if it wasn't for that Tasty Raid?
Yes, exactly. And in fact, I knew while I was running Uranus, which musically was the best club since Razer for me, like it was the shit. The music was fantastic. I was personally still on drugs. Like I burnt out in 1999. I went to rehab for like 9 months. And Uranus was just before that. And I know that undercover cops were in there and all that sort of stuff. And they were kind of untouchable because they knew that I was just a drug user. I wasn't selling drugs in my club. I wasn't doing anything like we did not organise the sale of drugs whatsoever, ever.
Just bought them.
We just bought them.
Yeah, say when I was younger.
Yeah. And police knew that about me and my clubs. And as I say, Uranus was the only one I had at the time because we would have Tasty, just for the record, we would have Tasty recoveries at Uranus for Red Raw and Winter Days, at the end of that whole thing. And we knew that, and that's where the initial, oh no, I won't say all that. Yeah, but it was. No, I'll have to stop.
You're right.
I've tied myself in a pretzel there. But but at Uranus, I ended up taking far too many amphetamines and burning out, and my DJing was getting more and more experimental with just trying to find out what I could fuck up on the mixer that would still keep the dance floor going. Remember, Daft Punk released that Homework album around the same time, and it just seemed like a whole album full of studio mistakes that were kept and put together to me. So I started playing around a lot, taking too many drugs.
Your relationship with police now, after that, obviously it's been up and down. Where does it lay now?
It's always, it was down at the Tasty Raid and in the immediate aftermath, but ever since then it's been up. For years and years, like 10 years after the raid, if I got pulled up by police, I was on some sort of database as the person from Tasty and they would just wave me on.
So your life now, I know you're still DJing and I know you're still running events from time to time. So what's the future look for you in this industry? And I guess also too, I'd love to do like a back here of what does the industry mean to you for the last 3 to 4 decades you've worked in it?
Well, for me at the moment, I'm DJing more than I ever have. I kind of was good at it for a long time and didn't really plan that much else. I know that you said at the top of the interview that I have a record label. We don't do much with the label. It's just if I want to put something out, there's an entity there. But so these days I just want to DJ. I don't really like being a promoter. I don't like, although the Tasty Raid anniversary was so much fun, and it was fun. I got my old promotions team and management team from Tasty back together because my business partners have all kind of drifted off elsewhere live interstate and stuff. And that was amazing. So we'll do that every year. Well, up until, say, the turn of the century, just before then when I went into rehab, it was everything, you know. It was, my role was to open rooms and present music. So it was everything. And having the trust of Melbourne, because I did for a long time, if I opened a club, people would come and appreciate it, and I could always have the best DJs working in it and stuff. So it was just part of my DNA. And then beyond that, how do I put this? Because I ended up kind of fucked up on drugs and I had to kind of pull back and not do clubs anymore. It kind of meant it was like a curse, you know, because I had this kind of profile and reputation which was kind of in the gutter for quite a long time. So throughout from about 2000 to 2010, I struggled quite a bit.
Like a loss of identity, would you say?
Loss of identity.
It's interesting because I say that with COVID. Like I worked for 16 years and then everything just stopped. And then the biggest struggle wasn't the loss of income. It was actually the loss of identity.
Loss of identity.
Because everything I worked for didn't exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know this might sound like a wank, and I'm not meaning to be a wanker, but there would be a certain status when you've got the coolest club in town and you're the DJ as well. I'd have like a position type thing, and people would treat you in a certain way. But as soon as that club failed and then you were working on getting another one going, which is what happened, it would be a constant cycle, you were like lonely. You were trying to, you know, people wouldn't treat you the same. You know, oh, yeah, whatever. And so that was really quite confronting. And so my emotions would go up and down quite a lot. And I remember after the Tasty Raid, it was a fucking awful period for about a year, just feeling empty and having it ripped away from you like that. So, but I should point out that all throughout that period from, say, 2002 to 2010, I was still DJing. I would go and just do really low-key gigs for like not much money at all, just to sort of try to get myself feeling like I wanted to do it again, because that's how I made money. I haven't talked about this before. Not like this. So, but then Poof Doof came along. Michael Delaney, Honky Tonk. He approached me once in club, and he said, I want to start a club in the city and on the top floor, do a gay club. And I just shook my head in, you know. I didn't let him see me doing it, but I thought, you're dreaming, mate. But he did it. I think he's brilliant. So yeah,
I think most would agree.
Yeah, I was very happy to work with Mike, and so I was DJing downstairs at the bottom end for a few months while he was planning Poof Doof. And so, you know, he got me roped in from the beginning of Poof Doof, which was really exciting because I hadn't done a Saturday night dance floor for young people in years. And all of a sudden, you know, I'm doing it, and he's asked me to be musical director. So it just took a couple of weeks to figure out how to make the young gays think they were in an underground club. I know that sounds like a terrible thing to say. You know, remixes of Lady Gaga songs and all this kind of stuff. And so they're hearing their pop stars mixed for clubs, and they loved it. Yeah, Poof Doof was fun.
That's awesome and super powerful. So, Gavin, we're going to have to end it here. Firstly, I want to thank you for coming down today. And I know I've sort of brought you back into maybe some great memories, but also some bad ones.
Yeah. You triggered a bit.
A little bit of PTSD, unfortunately, but I feel like the story needs to be told. I think it's to live on in a different generation.
Yep.
Because it's such an amazing story and yarn. But I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly, I need to thank my number one sponsor from the get-go, WP Shots, available at all nightclubs around Melbourne and all good ones anyway. First choice and Liquorland across the country and all good independents. Second, Estilio the label. Their clothes are so comfortable. If you don't believe it and you go buy one, I will refund you the money myself. And last but not least, AAA Digital. So if you're an event promoter, a festival owner, or just own a bar and you're looking to scale up your business, then hit up Carlo and the team at AAA Digital because they will no doubt skyrocket your business. So again, Gavin, thank you so much for your time today, and I really appreciate you coming down.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for those good questions.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.